Councillors, take your seats, please. Good evening. I am Councillor Denise Massoud, Mayor of Whitehorse, and I welcome you all to tonight's Ordinary Council meeting. I remind councillors that the meeting, other than the confidential meeting, is being recorded, and the audio recording made available publicly on our council website tomorrow. Our purpose is to provide greater access to council debate and decision making and encouraging openness and transparency. However, council accepts no liability for any individual opinions or statements. Councillors, please ensure your microphones are on when speaking and speak clearly and with volume. I formally open this council meeting and ask you all to stand for the opening prayer and statement. We give thanks, O God, for the men and women of the past whose generous devotion to the common good has been the making of our city. Grant that our own generation may build worthily on the foundations they have laid. Direct our minds that all we plan and determine is for the well-being of our city. Amen. In the spirit of reconciliation, Whitehorse City Council acknowledges the Wurundjeri people as the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present. Please be seated. I would now like to introduce our councillors and senior officers. On my left, Councillor Andrew Munro.
Good evening all and welcome.
Councillor Bill Bennett.
Good evening and welcome.
Councillor Raylene Carr. Councillor Andrew Davenport.
Good evening and welcome.
Councillor Sharon Ellis.
Good evening everyone, welcome.
Councillor Tina Liu.
Good evening everyone, welcome.
Councillor Blair Barker.
Good evening everyone, thanks for coming and thanks for braving the wind.
Councillor Prue Cutts.
Good evening everyone and welcome.
And Councillor Ben Stennett.
Good evening everyone, welcome.
And staff on my left, Chief Executive Officer Miss Nolene Duff.
Good evening.
General Manager Human Services Miss Terry Wilkinson. General Manager City Development Mr. Jeff Green. On my right, Executive Manager Governance and Customer Service Mr. Tony DeFazio.
Good evening everyone.
Team Leader Governance Miss Jenny Russell. General Manager Corporate Services Mr. Peter Smith. General Manager Infrastructure Mr. Philip Warner. And in the gallery Miss Sally Freud, General Manager for Communications. Item 2 is apologies. We have no apologies this evening. Item 3, councillors and officers, are there any disclosures of conflict of interests in regard to matters to be considered on tonight's agenda? If so, I will require a disclosure of that interest and the nature of that interest.
Item 12.1, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Ms Duff. We now move to item 4, confirmation of minutes. Councillors, we have listed on the agenda the minutes from our last meeting requiring confirmation by council. Can I have a motion to confirm the minutes of the ordinary and confidential council meeting held on the 21st of August 2017?
So moved, Mayor.
And
Moved Councillor Bennett, seconded Councillor Ellis. Thank you. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 5, responses to questions. Council provides the opportunity for anyone present in the gallery to submit a question in writing on the forms provided in accordance with Clause 18 of our meeting procedure local law, for which we will endeavour to provide a response. I will ask the Chief Executive Officer whether there are any questions submitted.
There are no questions this evening, Mayor.
Thank you. We move to item 6, notices of motion, and we have no notices of motion this evening. Item 7, petitions. Councillors, are there any petitions for tabling tonight? As there are no petitions, we move to item 8, urgent business. Councillors, do we have any items of urgent business? There being none, I will move to item 9, which is council reports. Councillors, we have a number of reports to consider tonight listed under City Development, Infrastructure, Human Services and Corporate. I will introduce each report in the order listed and will then call for a motion in regard to the item. Item 9.1, City Development. We have 9.1.1, Strategic Planning Update. Do I have a mover?
So moved, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. And a seconder?
Happy to second, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's often said that council's about roads, rates and rubbish, and I'm not quite sure where planning fits into that, I guess that's a byproduct of the rates, or in part, but councillors, you'd be well aware that planning is a very large part of your daily council life, and it is a very important part of the city, and it's very important that we get it right in terms of the state planning frameworks that we have to deal with, but also the local policies that we develop over time. What you have before you tonight is a report, a strategic planning update from March 2017, earlier this year to date, and it details some of the major planning projects that our officers have been undertaking and where those projects are at. And just the headline projects, we've got the C157 Whitehorse Heritage Review, C175 the Box Hill Metropolitan Activity Centre Built Form Guidelines that you'd all be very familiar with, C182 the rezoning of Burwood Highway 233. We have amendments 191 and 196, which is the municipal-wide significant landscape overlay work being undertaken, C192, which is 119 Surrey Road, Blackburn in Central Ward, of course, Morak Ward, C193, C194, combined planning scheme amendments for Station Street and Oxford Street in Box Hill. That's a major development site. We have also work on the activity centres, Burwood Heights Activity Centre, which is the former brickwork site, Box Hill Activity Centre, the MAC, Nunawading Activity Centre, Tallyho Activity Centre, and of course we've had the Built Environment Awards program, certainly a key part of the year for council, and our planning work and heritage work as well. So you can see with Plan Melbourne Refresh responding to state government planning changes that are constantly being undertaken, of course, and we have to respond to those. So there's a fair bit. There's even the Hillsville Freeway Reservation. So there is a lot going on in the planning space, and the report, for those that are interested and those in the gallery, there are some copies at the table there, goes into some detail about where we're up to in those reports. Community consultation, of course, is an integral part of the strategic planning process, and there's been wide consultation with regards to those projects underway across our municipality. So I'd encourage councillors to accept the report and the motion endorsing the report tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. Councillor Ellis.
Oh, I think Councillor Munro has covered it all very well, but I actually do want to touch on one particular item that is in this report, and that's regarding the Burwood Heights Activity Centre, the former brickwork site, as it used to be called. That's been an ongoing project for about 15 years now, and I know that the residents are very concerned that it be resolved, and they've shown a great interest. And I do note here that with the development plan overlay, a development plan must be prepared to council's satisfaction before planning permits can generally be granted. It is obvious by this that each stage has to have the planning permit lodged, and we have to be satisfied with each stage of the development. At the moment, there's a number of conditions that are yet to be satisfactorily addressed by the proponents for Fraser's Property Australia before the development plan can be endorsed. So council at this stage is waiting for a satisfactory outcome to that. And parallel to that process, several planning permit applications have been lodged with council for assessments. And they will need to be in accordance with the approval development plan and are exempt from third-party notification. So I think watch this space, and in our report in a further 6 months there may be more of an update on what's happening there. I urge my colleagues to support this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Is there a speaker against the motion? Are there any further speakers for the motion? There being none, I will put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Carried unanimously. We now move to item 9.1.2, Forest Ridge Development Plan for 104 to 168 Hawthorne Road, Forest Hill.
Mayor, I have an alternate motion.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Can we put the alternate up on the screen? I think since it's such a long motion, Councillor Bennett, could you just identify the changes from the published motion in the agenda, please?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, as the Mayor has said, councillors, the only change is to section K, or paragraph K, where officers recommended that we needed to specify or quantify a percentage public open space. So section K will now read: the provision of public open space does not meet the requirements of the schedule of clause 52.01, which requires a minimum of 4% public open space contribution on strategic sites, and noting that the preference is for the contribution to be taken as land on this site.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Do you have a seconder?
Happy to second, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, basically the intent of this motion is that we do not support the draft development plans. So the reasons, as you've seen, because you would have read the report, was that the reasons are many and varied, but let me just summarise for sake of brevity. One of the major issues that we do not recommend to support the draft development plan is that the maximum building height in the development plan is 6-storey, whereas in our own development plan overlay the maximum building height is 4-storey. Also, the officer's report does identify that this development is not in keeping with neighbourhood character, building setbacks, scale, heights and landscaping issues. And there's a lack of impact assessments about community infrastructure with such a huge development. The future use and development of the site, and car parking and traffic issues, and also adverse effects on the heritage value of the site. The provision of public open space is woeful, but I'll get to that later on. So a little bit of history, councillors. The applicant initially lodged a development plan in October 2016, and after feedback from officers lodged revised plans in March this year and again in May this year. As you know, at our June council meeting we agreed to put the updated plans out for public submission, although our officers still had many concerns that I've just summarised. Following the display of the development plan, the applicant lodged an appeal to VCAT about failure to determine the matter within a reasonable time frame, and you can make of that what you will. There's a practice hearing at VCAT scheduled for later this week, and that's the reason we need to form a position tonight about this application. So the public display, the 2 weeks that the public had to see this, proposed development plan, produced 101 submissions, and I think that was a fantastic outcome. One of those submissions was a petition signed by 30 residents objecting to the impact on the surrounding residential areas. It's obvious that the community is unhappy with a number of aspects of this development, and to be able to organise that many submissions within a 14-day period is a credit to the community. Perhaps not unsurprisingly, 74 submissions were concerned about traffic congestion or traffic safety, because there's going to be something like 700 new buildings and maybe 1,500 or more new people that would move into this area. The poor provision, getting to section K, the poor provision of open space was an issue raised by a significant number of submitters as well. The applicant is proposing an open space contribution of only 2.7% of this particular development. This equates to less than 3 average house blocks for this number of new residences, and in the order of 1,500 people. In my view, this is manifestly inadequate. So just summarising, councillors, as far as the open space is concerned, we need to specify an actual minimum amount, apparently, so this can be an argument that we can take to VCAT to specify that the minimum 4% public open space is one of the requirements of our clause 52.01. So we'd like more than 4% open space, but this motion calls for a minimum of 4% public open space. And as we know, in some developments, developers will offer cash in lieu of public open space or land. We don't want that. We want to make sure that our new residents have adequate public open space for their health and well-being in the future. So we don't want to take the cash grab, we want the land. So the land to be allocated for public open space at a minimum 4% level. So councillors, just to summarise, this proposed development fails to deliver on many fronts. Our community deserves better, I believe, and I ask for your support to confirm the officer recommendations that we do not support the development report in its current form. Thank you.
Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillors, at the risk of repeating some of Councillor Bennett's concerns, the Forest Ridge Development Plan before us tonight is not in keeping with neighbourhood character, as it does not provide a sensitive interface to neighbouring residents. It fails to provide a commitment to on-site car parking, fails to provide consistent information on the entry and egress to Tisane Avenue and Magnolia Drive, fails to provide an updated traffic impact statement, fails to provide a commitment to landscaping, fails to provide in-principle consent from Vic Roads on any mitigation measures for the intersection of Marnies and Springvale Roads, fails to sympathetically protect the heritage component of the site by hiding it behind 4-storey dwellings, fails to supply sufficient information and commit to ESD measures. And the minuscule 2.7% of public open space offered is inadequate and inconsistent with the minimum 4% required for strategic sites. The applicant should have offered at least 4% given the size of the land and the number of proposed residents. I note the guiding public open space contribution policy identifies a general preference for cash instead of land in the suburb of Forest Hill. Cash will not do the future residents any good at all. On such a large site, public open space will be far more beneficial to their well-being. It is a pity the Minister for Planning didn't include Bob Anset's helipad in the heritage overlay, as that would have provided an ideal open space area of historical significance. Councillors, 104 to 168 Hawthorn Road has been identified as a strategic redevelopment site and is therefore subject to a greater density than the surrounding area. However, this does not mean that we should override our own development plan overlay, which stipulates 4 stories as the maximum height by allowing 6 stories in this development. How are we to approve such an application when neither the on-site car parking, road widths, landscaping, current traffic volume and impacts, public transport study or the Vic Roads report have been provided? How do we approve a high density of 6 stories when our own development plan overlay stipulates 4 stories without substantial justification for an increase in height, which in this instance has not been forthcoming? So a far more acceptable outcome for this development would be a maximum 4 stories located in the middle of the site, transitioning down to 1 or 2 stories. Councillors, we all desire to protect our neighbourhood character, and this application does not value or respect the neighbourhood character at all. In regard to the residential interfaces, I ask you to support the alternate recommendation to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Is there a speaker against the motion?
Yes, Mayor.
Councillor Davenport.
Councillors, I rise to talk about this particular recommendation not to approve the development plan at 104 to 168 Hawthorne Road. As you know, in the report, this is going to VCAT for a determination, and therefore my preference is that any time that we are giving instructions to council organisation and council officers, that we write motions in the positive. And a number of these conditions can be written in such a way that can be written in a positive way, and we see it quite often in large developments. For example, traffic would be provide the information to the satisfaction of the planning authority. There's a number of other plans, there's a number of other conditions that fit within this framework. That's not enough for me to rise and speak against. There are 2 particular conditions. My preference is that they would be deleted. It is A and J. In terms of J, which is the development plan impacting views of the adjoining heritage place, as you know, I once served on the Heritage Committee for Council, and one thing that I learnt on that Heritage Committee is being able to view a property from public street or public road has little bearing on whether a site has heritage significance, or if it can't be seen from a public site, whether or not it should not have a heritage significance. It has very little impact. And therefore, I believe J is one that we should delete. The second is Part 1A, and that's the 6 stories versus 4 stories. Now, I can understand that when the strategic development site and all the planning was done over that particular site, at that particular point in time, I understand that the heritage question was not decided on the ATV0 studios. Now it has been, and it's my belief that given that site is there, protected in perpetuity, that the developer is given an opportunity to work with the site and maybe have some additional height allowances because of that heritage overlay. So it's A and J are the 2 ones that I would prefer to see deleted. So councillors, I urge you to vote against the motion, and if it gets defeated, I foreshadow that I'll run the same alternate as Councillor Bennett with Part A and J deleted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davenport. Is there a speaker for the motion? Is there another speaker against the motion? In that case, I give right of reply to Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, I think you're aware of the shortfalls of the applicant's draft development plan in connection with our own planning scheme and with the many and varied necessities that applicants would normally consider in a size in an application for a building site of this size. To me, the applicant is just trying this on without really doing their homework, and it's flawed on so many levels, but they've taken it to VCAT to see whether they can get a better outcome. So we need to determine and strongly determine our position here, so that at VCAT we can argue along the lines as the report states, in that it's short on so many aspects of our own planning scheme, and also things like neighbourhood character that can be argued at VCAT to make sure that this development plan, the current development plan, doesn't get up. There will be some development on this site, but this particular development plan falls far short of that. The heritage protection is necessary in this case, in my view. If we're going to have any heritage protection, we need to have some streetscape situation where we can view this the ATVO studio rather than hiding it behind six-storey buildings. So the four-storey and six-storey debate, well, our own development plan says four-storey, not six-storey. So, councillors, we need to follow this this alternate recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. I will now put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. There has been a division called. Those in favour? Councillor Ellis, Councillor Carr, Councillor Bennett, Councillor Munro, Councillor Masood, Councillor Liu, Councillor Barker, Councillor Cutts, Councillor Stennett. The motion, those against? Councillor Davenport. The motion is carried. We now move to item 9.1.3, the Heritage Advisor Annual Report for 2016-2017. Do I have a mover?
So moved, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cudds. Is there a seconder?
Yes, happy to second, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Perhaps just let the gallery empty and then I'll pass to you, Councillor Cutts. Thank you for coming, everybody. Councillor Cutts, if you would like to speak to motion 9.1.3.
Thank you, Mayor. This concerns just simply accepting the report and acknowledging the valuable contribution of the Heritage Advisor towards the protection of heritage places across the city. This service has been offered in Whitehorse since 2002, and this will be the 7th year that Ian Coleman of Coleman Architects Proprietary Limited has provided the service 1 day a week. The main role of the Heritage Advisor is to provide advice to both planning staff and members of the public regarding the development on properties covered by a heritage overlay. Heritage property owners who make inquiries to the planning department are advised of the Heritage Advisory Services and benefit of speaking to the Heritage Advisor before submitting applications and or when preparing documentation for works. The Heritage Advisor assists the strategic planning team regarding demolition applications as well, and the investigation of the appropriateness of seeking interim heritage overlay protection to these places. The Heritage Advisor has in fact provided advice to planning officers on preliminary proposals for large projects in Box Hill, the former ATVO site, which we've just spoken about recently in Forest Hill in the last motion, and the built form guidelines for the Box Hill Metropolitan Activity Centre. The Heritage Advisor assessed all applications in the last year under the Whitehorse Heritage Assistance Fund, and a total of 49 applications were received for this, where approval was given to 22 applications, of which 21 proceeded. Part of the role of the Heritage Advisor is also ongoing review of places with potential heritage significance. If people turn to Appendix 1, we can see that a whole range, or 13 precincts, have been listed there, and these are the areas of which the Heritage Advisor provides information to pre-application visits, verbal discussions and referrals. There are also other areas such as assisting people who might be living adjacent to these heritage listed properties. The Heritage Advisor assists with bluestone, curb and channel inquiries, and also individually listed properties. So as we can see, Ian's very busy assisting many people around our municipality with their beautiful homes, and so I simply ask councillors to please support this recommendation. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cutts. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Cutts has covered the report very well indeed, so thank you, Councillor Cutts. As mentioned, one of the roles of the Heritage Advisor is to liaise with residents and provide valuable heritage advice on how they may renovate or improve their property. A common myth in the community is that a heritage listed place cannot be renovated. This is simply not the case, and so I would encourage any resident who has a heritage listed property and is wishing to make some changes to contact our Heritage Advisor, Ian Coleman, for advice. He will not only provide the advice for no charge, he will, if he possibly can, advise where you may be able to purchase the material required. Ian, along with members of the Heritage Steering Committee, of which Councillor Cutts and myself are members of, he convenes the Heritage Assistance Fund, which provides grants of up to $2,000 to eligible owners and occupiers to assist with ongoing maintenance. This year's applications closed on the 8th of September, so I look forward to reviewing these. Ian has been providing excellent heritage advice to Whitehorse Council and residents for over 7 years. I note his contract has another 2 years to run and has the option of a 12-month extension. My thanks to officers for this comprehensive report, and thanks also to Mr. Ian Coleman for his extensive knowledge and experience with all heritage-related issues. I'm very happy to second the acknowledgement of this report. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Is there a speaker against the motion? There being no speaker against the motion, I will put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? The motion is carried. We now move to item 9.1.4, Tender Evaluation Report, the panel of providers for road resurfacing and associated services. Do I have a mover?
Madam Mayor, I so move, but I also move that 914, 915, 916 and 917 be debated concurrently.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. You're proposing a block motion. I will firstly have to see if there is a seconder to support the block motion.
Happy to second, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. I will now ask councillors to indicate if they support the block approach to these 4 motions. Those in favour? Carried unanimously. So now I will call for a seconder, I believe, for the block motion. Councillor Munro has put that forward. Councillor Barker, you're seconding, and we are putting 9.1.4, 9.1.5, 9.1.6 and 9.1.7 as a motion together.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As they're all tender evaluation reports, it seemed to have some synergy to put them together. For the record, as we are being recorded, I will just mention that the first one is providers for road resurfacing and associated services, 914. 915 is for the provision of open space, play space and related infrastructure. 916 is for services in locating stormwater pipe cleaning and lining thereof, and 917 is Hagenau Reserve, the athletics track in Box Hill resurfacing. Madam Mayor and councillors, the details are all in the report. I'll just highlight the provision of open space and play space equipment. I love what council's doing in that space. There's some high quality play spaces being built, and I think there's a new one, a new pocket park being opened very shortly, if I haven't missed it already, in an area where there was this Thursday, in an area, Oak Street is it? In an area where there was a deficiency. So we're putting in high quality equipment, and the tender evaluation relates to those and the other items I mentioned, and I so move.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. Councillor Barker.
Thanks, Mayor. I think Councillor Munro has covered that well. I would like to point out the joint procurement effort, particularly in the providers of road resurfacing and associated goods. Now, these are reasonably technical products. They're very high value procurements for us, and it's really pleasing to see a number of councils in terms of Burundara, Knox, Manningham, Monash, Nillumbek, ourselves and Yarra Ranges combine on that, because there's certainly a number of economies to be realised in the evaluation of these providers, which is very pleasing to see. And also the importance of Hagenau Reserve, Madam Mayor. This again meets all of the requirements that we have, and I know it's a very important project for the budding athletes in our city. I recommend it to councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Is there a speaker against the motion? There being none, I will put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? The motion is carried. We now move to item 9.2, infrastructure, and 9.2.1, review of asset management policy. Do I have a mover?
Happy to move, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Davenport. Is there a seconder?
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Davenport.
Councillors, you would have seen the newspaper in recent times about Australia Day and the current postal survey that has been put forward by the federal government. And if you read the newspapers, you'll see that a number of people come back and say council's domain is road, rates and rubbish. Well, I agree to that to a certain extent, but instead of using the words roads, I would replace that with the words of assets, because asset management is one of the core principles of what council undertakes for the community. You might have heard me in the chamber talk about landfill in the past and how important that is, and managing landfill sites. Assets is another one where decisions that we make today affect the generations to come. And therefore having a asset management policy, a framework and subordinate documents are of key importance to be able to work out which assets need to be renewed, which assets need to be maintained, and have a bit of process behind that when looking at classes of assets and how to maintain them. When you read the agenda, you'll notice that we have over $1.32 billion of assets under our management as council, and we have a finite amount of resources available in the budget. And so having a proactive approach to asset management is important, because it means that the finite resources can go where it's needed most and hopefully prevent any types of breakages or failures of assets which can impact the community's way of life. This particular asset management policy does just that. When you read the report and the policy framework documents that we've all seen, you'll see that the asset management policy is one that's robust, sound, and has been done in accordance with a number of advisory groups. And I recommend it to your consideration and approval tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davenport. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, look, I agree with Councillor Davenport's summation of the asset management policy. I must admit I was wondering where he was going with Australia Day, but anyway, we got back on the point pretty quickly. But councillors, the asset management policy, in my mind, demonstrates our ongoing commitment to the best practice asset management. And I think this is important, and one of the amendments to the asset management policy was to include a vision statement, and the vision statement reads, as custodians of community assets, Council will provide assets to enable a healthy, vibrant, prosperous and sustainable community. And I think that's a great vision statement, and certainly something that that needs to be included in the policy. So that's certainly a positive step. The current council plan also identifies a key strategy to maintain, renew and sustainably invest in our community infrastructure that is relevant, modern and accessible and can accommodate multi-purpose usage. So as Councillor Davenport has said, there's a number of plans that feed in and work and are synergistic with this asset management policy. I also note that this policy will progressively align with international asset management standards, and I believe this is important as we seek to deliver assets in line with world's best practice. So my recommendation is that we support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Is there a speaker against the motion? There being none, I will put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. We now move to item 9.2.2, Major Projects Councillor Reference Group. Do I have a mover?
Happy to move, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Davenport. Is there a seconder?
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Davenport.
Councillors, as you may recall on the 8th of May of this year at Special Committee, there was a motion that came up to establish a Major Projects Councillor Reference Group, which is to be chaired by the Mayor. And this particular reference group at the time envisaged giving councillors some additional reporting and some additional review mechanism on projects that are of significant size. And at the time in May, the reason why that motion was carried was because it is acknowledged that there is a large program of work that Whitehorse is undertaking over the next few years with the Whitehorse Centre, the Nunawading Hub, and there's a number of other projects that are in the pipeline, just to name a few. And if you look at the agenda, you'll notice that there's about $125 million currently in that particular pipeline. And so the idea with this particular reference group was to ensure that we get timely reports as councillors on how the projects are going, and to be given financial reports as well on how the spend is going, because there is a significant amount of contingency within these particular programs, and it's my belief that having extra governance frameworks will assist us bring projects in on the underlying budgeted amount. So I was very pleased to see this particular response from officers in terms of the governance structure, because it went a few steps further than what the original motion had spoken about, and it now details the other groups that feed into that reference group. And you'll be able to see that on Figure 2 there is a number of other groups, and that's the Major Projects Councillor Reference Group, the Executive Management Team, the individual project control groups and working groups. And I think that having a balance between the EMT's oversight on large projects plus checking in with councillors is the appropriate way forward. I urge you to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davenport. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Davenport has outlined the strong financial commitment that we've got in Whitehorse to our major projects, and I think it's also important to realise that these major projects are not ward specific, they're across the board, they're for the benefit of all people in the Whitehorse community. Unlike planning applications that are usually quite parochial, to use that word, these are major infrastructures that we're using across our city. And I think it's really important that all councillors are involved. And certainly the Aqualink was an example of how this works really well. And I, for one, value the opportunity to go on site, hard hat and yellow vest, whatever, to see it evolve, because you have a real understanding of how much expertise is going into these projects, because we are spending a lot of money. Quite a lot of funds are going into these developments, and for councils to be involved at that level gives them the ability to talk to the community and explain the projects to the community and the importance of them, and just how diligent we are when we undertake these major projects. So I'm really looking forward to being involved in this group, because we've got a lot of work planned in the coming years, and I think our community needs to know that we're keeping a watchful eye as their representatives on the works that are happening. And I actually think it's quite exciting, and I can't wait to don that hard hat again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. That's good to know. Is there a speaker against the motion? If there's no speaker against the motion, I will put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We now move to item 9.3, Human Services. 9.3.1 is Municipal Early Years Plan, the Implementation Report, Year 3 of the plan. Do I have a mover?
So moved, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. Is there a seconder?
Happy to second, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Liu.
Councillors, this report is an update on the implementation status of the Municipal Early Years Plan 2014 to 2018, a city of all children, which looks at the Year 3 actions in particular. The implementation of the plan will be completed by December 2018, so there are a number of action plans for the next 12 months. Just a bit of background, in August 2014, Council adopted a strategic plan for the improvement and development of services and support for families with young children aged from infancy to 12 years across the municipality, which will be implemented across the 4 years with annual progress reports as part of the implementation and evaluation process. The plan, which also sits within the broader Whitehorse Community Wellbeing Plan, provides an important strategic framework for councils, communities, partner organisations and governments to prioritise action and resources catering towards the education, care, health and social outcomes for children and their families. It also provides direction on the current and future issues of importance within Whitehorse. Through comprehensive planning, looking at a review of government policy, Whitehorse demographics, early years services in the community, and consultation with stakeholders, 4 key priority areas were identified and their respective action plans developed in the plan. And these include 1, healthy, active and thriving children. Point 2, secure, supported and engaged families. 3, quality services for all children and families. And 4, safe, welcoming and inclusive community for all children and families. The Whitehorse Municipal Early Years Plan Steering Committee was established by Council in 2013 to guide the development of the plan. Following its adoption, The committee was reformed as the Whitehorse Early Years Reference Group, monitoring the implementation of the plans. There have been a number of key achievements which I'd like to touch upon, including the Family Resource Guide. Now, this is a new comprehensive resource that brings together parenting support information, which was launched this year. The guide, in particular, focuses on active kids and the family's role in encouraging exercise and healthy eating. It also details the local parks and playgrounds that we have within the municipality and how families can become more active. There's also been a series of parenting information forums. 8 have been conducted last year, with 4 forums focusing on early years, including children's anxiety and worries, which is one that I attended recently, primary school preparation and transition, building resilience and self-esteem, and connected parenting. It is also worth noting that at Whitehorse, we actually have a higher immunisation rate compared to state and regional averages at almost 94%. And that equates to about 13,000 or over 13,000 vaccinations administered to babies, infants and preschool children in the municipality. There's also ongoing support and initiatives around new parent groups, toy libraries and playgroups, as well as the early years sector network and consultation work done through the early childhood services team, including playground design consultation and work at 3 of Whitehorse Early Learning Service Centres. We've also seen a growth in the use of the FlexiBuzz app as a communications channel to update subscribers to the latest news and updates regarding health and family services, and also working with culturally and linguistically diverse communities, including the Chinese and Iranian groups, on a range of topics, including healthy eating for children. And it's also worth noting that we've been building quite a lot of relationships and partnerships with service providers such as Carrington Health in terms of free dental checkup for kids, as well as continuing to work and support the Whitehorse Preschool Association to promote 3 to 4-year-old kindergarten and assist parents to register and enrol in these programs, and looking at priority access to vulnerable families in particular. There's also a lot of work in the family violence space. And just to finish up, as you can see the report, there's been many great initiatives undertaken, and I'm happy to receive this report, and I ask my fellow councillors to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. Councillor Ellis.
Madam Mayor, I don't think there's anything left for me to add. I think Councillor Liu has covered it very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. It certainly was a good report. Are there any speakers against the motion? There being none, I will put the motion to the vote.
Mayor, I'd like an opportunity to speak in favour.
Certainly, Councillor Stennett. That's excellent. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I'm pleased to support this motion report. As some of you might know, I'm currently working as a teacher with primary age students. I support the report, especially the importance of the early years of a child's life that really do lay the foundations to provide opportunities and prevent problems later in life. And I have a secondary teaching background, so I also have some insight into that side of it as well. The actions and resources contained in this plan aim to improve education, care and health and social outcomes for children and their families. So I'd particularly like to highlight a couple of the achievements in one in particular, on page 61, the engaging children, new engaging children in decision-making framework and resource. Particularly, I'm interested in a concept called the child-friendly cities, as some of you may be aware, and part of that, a big part of that, is seeing children as citizens, giving them an opportunity for them to have a say on matters that affect them, and this consultation work that Council's doing and has done in the past is really important to that, and contained in that report in fact is a commitment to the principles of child-friendly cities, which is great. I'd also like to attest the popularity of the parent information forums. I attended one in the Willis Room, and it was actually oversubscribed by about 50 people because they couldn't get in the door. There's not enough room, and it'd be great to see the new Whitehorse Centre with a lot of extra spaces and flexibility, and we'll be able to run these parent information forums down there once they're constructed as well. So it's a great report. Look forward to the next 12 months, and I'd like to thank all of those involved.
Thank you, Councillor Stennett. Is there anybody else who would like to speak for the motion?
Mayor, I would like to as well, please.
Okay, Councillor Cutts.
Thank you, Mayor. Just going on from Councillor Stennett's comments, and I want to focus in on one thing, is the parent information forums. I have personally, with my child, who's now 15, attended many, many of these, and I have found them so useful. I've always gone away with many useful pieces of information which have added to my parenting, and I cannot recommend these more highly. So that's all I really wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cutts. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I will put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? The motion is carried. We now move to item 9.3.2, the Municipal Youth Plan 2014 to 2018 Implementation Report for Year 3. Do I have a mover?
Happy to move, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Stennett. And is there a seconder?
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. Councillor Stennett.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'm pleased to move this motion. As I said before, I'm a teacher with a secondary background, so I do understand the importance of this period of development that occurs in the adolescence and early adult years. There's an important role for the community to play to ensure that there is a smooth transition into adulthood. This report is to update Council of the implementation of the Municipal Youth Plan. It was called A City for All Young People, and it's designed to capture those in our city aged 12 to 25 years of age, and I note it dovetails really well with the early years plan that goes from 0 to 12. And I note that when I first ran for council, I was within this age range. The years on council have somewhat aged me. This is year 3 of the 4-year plan. The plan contains 5 priority areas, and they're noted on page 64. Healthy, resilient and engaged young people, secure families and relationships, employment, training and education opportunities, comprehensive services for all young people, and safe, welcoming and inclusive communities. These priority areas form the basis of actions that were developed and are developed in partnership between council and partner organisations and other key stakeholders. There's also been a steering committee that's been developed to guide and monitor the implementation of the plan, the composition of which the 6 council officers from across the organisation, representatives from 6 community organisations and government departments, 2 young people from council's youth representative committee, also worked with the reference group to guide the implementation of the plan, which is great to see. A number of key achievements on page 64 as well. The youth services provide youth connections drop-in centre, the music and cultural events for young people, the Municipal Youth Forum organised by the Youth Representative Committee, the Box Hill Assertive Outreach Program, and the Whitehorse Creative Online Youth Hub. There are also significant actions for the next 12 months, and I'd like to thank those involved in their plan and implementation, and look forward to the next 12 months.
Thank you, Councillor Stennett. Councillor Liu.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think Councillor Stennett had covered the main points very well. I just wanted to touch upon just a couple of initiatives around the young people and mental health and well-being, and that initiatives are in place and are ongoing to provide support for young people experiencing mental health issues and the families as well that are affected by it. Also, the maintaining the operation of the Box Hill Assertive Outreach Program, which I think is just so important, especially in terms of engaging and providing support for young people that are most likely to become disengaged and participate in high-risk behaviours. So I think about over 200 young people have been engaged through this program over the last 12 months, and so that's great to see. And just to touch upon that as well, Council are continuing to explore potentially extending this program beyond Box Hill to other areas in the municipality. We are continuing with the parent information programs as well, and you know, as a couple of the other councillors have mentioned this evening, that they've been very well received and very popular with parents and families, so that is an ongoing initiative. And lastly, I just wanted to touch on I guess providing more support for young people to access relevant and valuable work experience and to prepare them for employment opportunities in the future, which I think is imperative. And some of the action plans that have been included within the plan looks at encouraging young people in regards to volunteering, implementation of structured workplace learning within Whitehorse City Council for senior secondary students, resume writing program for young people, which certainly was very helpful when I was, you know, a young person as well, and presentation to Reconnect program in regards to supporting young people to access training opportunities at Box Hill TAFE. So I'm happy to receive this report, and I urge my fellow councillors to support this motion as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. Is there a speaker against the motion?
I'd like to speak for it.
Okay. I will now call for speakers for the motion. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, I suppose my comments almost cross over 9.3.1 and 9.3.2, as the councillors spoke before about how the early years program does dovetail into the senior years program. And I compliment council officers on the comprehensiveness of the plan in terms of from cradle, maternal and child health nurses, all the way through to our youth programs. And I think that's really important, looking at the detailed role of Aqualink and some of the youth connection services. But I think it's also important that I make some comments about where I feel, whilst I'm supporting this, and the reasons I'm about to give you don't justify anyone voting against it. I think it is very important that a couple of points to note about these reports are taken on board. And I suppose I'm interested in, there's mention of sports clubs and there's mention of the services that we provide. But there are two very significant absences that are noticeable by their absence in terms of their mention or their consideration in both of these reports. And the first of those is faith-based organisations. And the second is for-profit or the private sector providers that we have in the City of Whitehorse, as they refer to both early childhood years, or more particularly in this instance, youth services. Firstly, sports clubs. I don't see in this document a real understanding that sports clubs provide far more than just a sporting experience for the children and the youth of Whitehorse. And I'd like to make particular mention to the SALT program, which is the Sport and Life Training program. And I think this is really important that we understand the role here, because there's the potential that we have the duplication of effort. Did I hear that somewhere?
Somebody called point of order.
Okay,
Councillor Stennett.
Yeah, I'm really interested to hear Councillor Barker different points of view, but he says he's speaking in favour of this motion, but a lot of this is pretty negative stuff. So I don't know whether it's speaking in favour or against.
I understand where you're coming from, Councillor Stennett. I also sat here thinking, hang on, we're going off on a bit of a tangent here. I do ask that you speak to the motion, Councillor Barker. and address the issues that have been described. I think to go out to other detail, which could well be considered in the background of the motion, but is not individually identified here. The motions and the reports have to not be too long. If you can just speak to the main points of the motion, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. I was complimenting the report and its comprehensiveness, but noting that there were some important absences, and that was the mention of faith-based youth leadership programs from Crossways to New Hope. These are some of the largest youth programs in our electorate, and the for-profit in terms of dance schools and karate dojos that are often the most respected providers of services to children on the autism spectrum scale. I'll leave it there, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. I appreciate you wanting to highlight other points, but I can assure you that certainly the team at Youth Connections are very much across what's available in the community for our youth, and they do give references out to our youth. So I do believe we are covering that, but it may not be obvious in the report. I now ask, are there any further speakers for the motion? There being none, I will put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? The motion is carried.
Mayor, could I just make sure that it's noted that it was carried unanimously?
Very happy to state carried unanimously. Thank you, Councillor Stennett. We now move to item 9.4, which is corporate reports. 9.4.1 is tender evaluation report for supply and implementation of storage, computer and backup infrastructure. Do I have a mover?
Happy to move, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. Is there a seconder?
Happy to second, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A very important tender, this one, councillors, in that it's ensuring that we have an adequate backup and recovery system for our information technology services here at Council, and to ensure that we have business continuity moving forward. The tender report is there before you, and the figures, the financial implications on page 68 of your report. I do note, and I think it's quite important, and I'm not sure how you pronounce it, whether it's 1L or ONL Consulting. I'm not sure how you pronounce that word, but anyway, it's ONEL Consulting. They are a Gold Nimble partner and a Premier Certified Cisco partner, but most importantly, they have a large established base in local government, including Knox, Boroondara, Manningham, Maroondah, Yarra and Banyule, to name a few, and also involved in the tertiary education sector. So they do have a track record, and I think that gives Council great confidence that we have an experienced tenderer being recommended here, and for most important work in ensuring backup, storage and continuity of our IT infrastructure and business.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillors, I'm sure you would all agree that secure IT backup is vital. Storage of information needs to be located in a secure environment, protected from all possible risks. Councillors, approving this motion is a no-brainer. I encourage your support. We must look after our IT, we must back up our systems, and we must store them off-site very securely. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Is there a speaker against the motion? Are there any further speakers for the motion? There being none, I will put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Motion is carried unanimously. We now move to item 9.4.2, 78 Middleborough Road, Burwood East, minor suburb boundary alignment. Do I have a mover?
Happy to move, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. And a seconder?
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Davenport. Councillor Ellis.
This is a fairly minor realignment of the suburb boundary. A small parcel of land, which was previously known as 4 Ely Road, Blackburn South, was sold. The house was demolished and the area was incorporated into the former brickwork site, which is at 78 Middleborough Road, Burwood East. The parcel of land situated in the northwest corner of 78 Middleborough Road, Burwood East, will be divided into 2 lots, which does result in the current suburb boundary between Blackburn South and Burwood East running through one of these lots, which is fairly complicated. Council proposes a minor realignment of the suburb boundary so that the entire property address of 78 Middleborough Road will be assigned as the suburb Burwood East. There'll be no change of the suburb address, and the only change will be the area formerly known as 14 Ely Road, Blackburn South. Council has actually undergone the correct consultation for this process. Council officers sought advice from a staff member at the Office of the Register of Geographic Names, I should say, who confirmed the process to follow in relation to the minor boundary alignment. A 30-day consultation process with the community was undertaken, seeking support or objection. Notice was placed in the Council's website and also the Whitehorse Leader. And there were no submissions received at all, either against or in support. So there are no financial implications for this. It is simply a realignment of suburbs to ensure some consistency and also to ensure that people that are looking for some deliveries or some assistance or an emergency will be able to be found. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Davenport.
Nothing further to add.
Are there any speakers against the motion? Are there any further speakers for? Then I will put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Motion is carried unanimously. We now move to item 9.4.3, delegated decisions for July 2017. Do I have a mover?
So moved, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. And a seconder?
Happy to second, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cutts. Councillor Carr?
It's only procedural, Madam Mayor, nothing to add. Thank you.
Councillor Cutts?
Nothing further to add, thank you.
Thank you. If councillors are happy, I'll put the motion to the vote, being a procedural. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. That takes us to item 10 on the agenda, which is reports from delegates, special committee recommendations and assembly of councillor records. Item 10.1 is reports by delegates. So these are councillors who are delegates to committees and appointed as representatives of council. I'll start on my left. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On the 23rd of August, there was a board meeting for the Whitehorse Manningham Library Corporation. In that, we were looking at the draft 2016-17 financial statements. The board approved the statements and they've since been signed off. So that is all done for another year. The other item on the agenda that I'll touch on was the reappointment of the Manningham Community Rep for the Library Corporation. Both Manningham and Whitehorse have, through their library board constitution, the opportunity to have a community rep on the board. And that is someone that obviously has a love of libraries, an understanding of the community in which they live, in the case of the Whitehorse one, or in the Manningham one, the same situation. So this was coming to the board. The person is initially appointed by Manningham themselves. They undergo the process of getting expressions of interest and then assessing the applicants and making a decision. The board only gets to ratify the process. But it's interesting because I don't think a lot of people out there, despite it being advertised widely, there's probably a lot of people out there in the community that don't notice it. So I urge my fellow councillors, in the future when this is advertised for Whitehorse, which may be in a couple of years' time, if you know anybody that's interested, certainly let them know. It'd be quite a good thing to get keen readers and lovers of literature and lovers of Whitehorse on as our rep. Thank you. My second one is the Eastern Affordable Housing Alliance, and we had that meeting on the 7th of September. And the main point of that was to look at our advocacy statements for both the state and federal governments. And as you know, we've got a state election coming up in a year, so we should start our advocacy now because it's important that we get the message out. During the last year, we have actually met with 7 ministers, including one in Canberra, and that covers federal, state, Labor and Liberal. We haven't left any stone unturned, and we have 2 more meetings with MPs lined up in the next 3 weeks, so that's very exciting because it's important that we continue to advocate. Even if we have met certain ministers before, we're quite happy to have another meeting with them. And of course the issues for state and federal are very different because as an EAHA, we're actually looking at social and affordable housing, whereas the federal government's really coming from a position of housing affordability when we meet with them. But I guess our logic is that if we fix the housing affordability at a federal level, there's going to be less filter down that's going to require any social housing. So we'll continue to advocate and hopefully we'll be successful. We've certainly raised the profile of the issue and we'll continue to work on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Davenport.
Councillors, I attended the library board on the 23rd of August with Councillor Ellis. The 2 main topics were the financial report as well as the appointment of the board, which Councillor Ellis has already touched on. There are a number of minor matters. We did receive the quarterly report and we also made a decision on the cleaning tender. Nothing further to report.
Thank you, Councillor Davenport. Councillor Carr.
Madam Mayor, last Wednesday afternoon we had a meeting of the Domestic Animal Management Plan Advisory Committee. Again, it was a very, they're always long meetings. They go for at least 2 hours and we're still looking for more time, I think, at the end of them. Last Wednesday, most of the meeting was finalising the Domestic Animal Management Plan. We're pretty close to finalising and it should be ready to come before Council very soon. So I look forward to that because it has been an extensive discussion. There's been a lot of good ideas put forward by the members of the committee. Some have been included, some perhaps not. Community have been consulted, so we've included their opinions and their comments wherever possible. It will be a good plan when it's released. So as I say, I do look forward to it, and I'm sure everyone sitting around this table will also look forward to a really good read. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I attended the MAV Environment Committee meeting 31st of August. Presentation was by DELP about waste and resource recovery. So in this space there's lots of interest, as we know. So just to define exactly what the different players, what they do in this space, is DELP set the policy for waste and resource recovery. The EPA regulates this. Sustainability Victoria and other groups such as the Metropolitan Waste and Resource Recovery Group deliver the projects via the private sector. So there's a good update from our engineering department on our dashboard to give an overview of what the current state of recycling is in Whitehorse and Victoria. It should be noted that certainly there are more controls in place with recycling in Victoria compared with New South Wales and Queensland. There's still challenges in this space, but Victoria is doing relatively well when it comes to recycling and resource recovery. The second part of this meeting was a case study that was presented from Boroondara about a trial of recycling of soft or flexible plastics. So just some figures for you, that 22% of general municipal waste by volume is soft plastics, but only 7% by weight. So you can imagine, because it's plastic bags and what have you. But it was interesting that the largest contributor is product packaging, from things like bread wraps, pasta, frozen food, etc., and not single-use plastic bags, which was a bit of a surprise to me. That does play a significant part, but it's not the largest contributor. The other delegate report is to do with the Whitehorse Business Group on the 12th of September. So they held a very successful trademarks event. Planning continues for the Gala Awards dinner. So Peter Rosethorn of Kath and Kim fame is the MC. So we're all looking forward to him. So it'll be a great night. So councillors, if you haven't already booked, make sure you do book for the Gala Awards dinner. One of the Whitehorse Business Group's members, and an important institute in our area, Box Hill Institute, has been awarded the best Metro Business Enterprise Centre in Australia. So a real feather in the cap of Box Hill Institute. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Munro.
No report.
Thank you. Councillor Liu.
Yes, Madam Mayor. Just in terms of DAMPAC and Whitehorse Business Group, which both Councillor Carr and Councillor Bennett had covered, so I've got nothing further to add. But I would like to say congratulations to Box Hill Institute. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barker.
No report, Mayor.
Councillor Cutts.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have a few reports as I missed the last ordinary meeting due to illness. First of all, on Tuesday the 8th of August, I chaired the Whitehorse Reconciliation Advisory Committee meeting, and we had some invited guests, Stuart McFarlane, the Aboriginal Contact Officer from the City of Darebin, and Aboriginal consultant Charles Picana. They had a very interesting presentation, and Stuart provided a very informative document which detailed a chronology of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander culture and development in Darebin, and I asked for something to be prepared by the officers so that we could have something like that with Whitehorse as well, because we don't have such a document, and that is being currently worked on, and I'll look forward to bringing that to Council when that's complete. We then moved on to the Australia Day discussions, and since that has been in the media recently, with particularly Yarra and Darebin councils, and more recently with Moreland only a few days ago, coupled with some media contact by a couple of our councillors, I would like to present some information. So at the meeting on August the 8th, I mentioned the Australian Local Government Association conference that many of us attended in June, and the number of 90 motions that were brought forward to there, and one of them was about the Australia Day. It was motion 52, which proposed that the National General Assembly encourage Australian councils to consider efforts they could take to lobby the federal government to change the date of recognition of Australia Day. And this was after a lengthy debate, passed 64 to 62. Now we continued to have a discussion about this, and some of the members of the RAC agreed to independently meet and provide a recommendation or group of recommendations to be raised at the next RAC meeting in November. This had been brought up previously in May, however our 3 Wurundjeri elders were not present at that particular meeting, so therefore the discussions did not proceed at that stage. What is decided is that we will then bring that to the advisory committee, and should it be discussed to move forward to council, I'll bring a recommendation to council. However, I do have to state that we all agreed, or it was all agreed, that small steps would be the right course of action at this point in time. And as for next year, or indeed anything, there is no new position on Australia Day from what we have currently. So at this stage, it is business as usual. There is nothing that's come up to council. This is something that is being discussed in the advisory committee though. So that is that one there.
Councillor Cutts, I'm just clarifying that is the discussion at the Reconciliation Advisory
Correct.
Committee
that is
where they can make recommendations to council, but
council.
it is not council policy at this point.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
So it is business as usual, and there are no plans to change anything for 2018. So that is the position. This is nothing to do with council here. This is the advisory committee, to make that very clear. My second report is from EAGA, which is the Eastern Alliance for Greenhouse Action, which I attended on Thursday the 10th of August. This is where we have got 8 members. We've had a recent addition, which is Glen Ira, join the group. We talked about our Solar Savers program, which is going to be rolled out next year. A lot of what EAGA does is advocacy and lobbying. So we're talking about electricity contracts, procurement, emission reduction targets, and our key person, who is from the Maroondah Council, works very hard on this. We did have a discussion to possibly open up the realm of EAGA to also look at the value of trees in our environment as providing energy savings in terms of shade to houses and reducing the amount of carbon and things like that. So what is going to be happening in the future is a couple of things were put to the executive group, and one was to look at the one was that planning infringements are insufficient to prevent malpractice by property owners and developers, and it is likely that there will be a recommendation that EAGA should advocate to the state government for an increase in the infringement penalty units that reflects the true value of trees and vegetation and incentivises best practice by property owners and developers. So that was something there. And the other one, which was very interesting, was that there's insufficient guidance for vegetation protection in the Victorian planning framework. And this goes to what we've already spoken about this evening, or was in one of the reports, that the first 6 councils to actually adopt environmentally sustainable development policies. One of these was Whitehorse Council, so I think we should feel very proud about that. There are now, Monash joined September 16, Manningham and Darebin more recently, and Knox at this stage is awaiting gazettal. So there are some good things happening there, and that's hopefully going to be part of the EAGA framework. So that's that one. And the last one I attended, or indeed opened on behalf of yourself, Mayor, the Visual Arts Committee, as I'm joint with Councillor Carr, joint chair. I opened up a wonderful exhibition at Box Hill Community Arts Centre. A ceramicist and painter, a young Chinese lady, Yin Hong Li, and it was a wonderful event, and we all really enjoyed it. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Councillor Cutts. Councillor Stennett.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one report. I attended the Audit Advisory Committee meeting earlier today, and I'd like to report several items from the meeting. First, today was the first meeting of the committee's new independent member, Lisa Woolmer. We also welcomed the newly appointed internal auditors from Crowe Horwath. There were some discussions about the proposed internal audit work plan. The committee received some management reports on the draft annual report of operations for 2016-17 and the implementation progress for meeting the recent child safety standards. The committee also noted the Victorian Auditor General's Office of VAGO correspondence on public participation and community engagement in the local government sector. And our next meeting is on the 20th of November.
Thank you, Councillor Stennett. I also attended the Audit Advisory Committee meeting this morning, and our internal auditors, Crowe Horvath, also presented the scopes for their first internal audits on procurement and payroll reviews, and the committee reviewed 3 corporate policies in its ongoing program of policy review and oversighting, and offered suggested enhancements for when these are next updated. And it was quite a good meeting, I believe, this morning that we participated in. There was a meeting on the 25th of August, which was the Eastern Regional Group of CEOs and Mayors. It was held in Manningham. A lot of the discussion within that group is still centring around the metropolitan partnerships, and I think I won't say too much about that. There'll be some commentary in conferences because I think most of us, or many of us, attended the Eastern Partnership Assembly recently. I also attended the Metropolitan East MAV representatives, mayors and CEOs meeting on the 15th of September. That was quite an interesting meeting to get feedback from the MAV. Certainly they introduced a gentleman, Peter Ryan, who has now been appointed to look after the MAV insurance and procurement. Also they highlighted the new Minister for Local Government and talked about the Geelong elections, which will be held in October this year. There have been 2 monitors appointed to the City of Geelong, and there were some questions raised as to why the state government actually appointed monitors before they've actually elected the council. Central Goldfields, there was a report that went to the local government inspectorate, and then 5 days later that council was actually dismissed. And I think there have been a few questions asked about that, but I'm sure more will come out. There are also some discussions around the City of Ararat and the fact that they have removed or proposed to remove the farmer differential rate. A lot of things were discussed. I'm trying to keep this short. One interesting fact is that the MAV is now very pleased to declare that they have 79 out of 79 councils now in the MAV. And a couple of things that were discussed then after the MAV gave their report was the Northwest Link, and perhaps the consultation around that, where they've had a public meeting recently in Banyule, and I think they're not feeling that they're necessarily being listened to particularly well in that area, but I guess that consultation and what happens with that project will continue, and we'll eventually see what the result is. They also in Banyule have had a few issues around the rail crossing removal projects, and I guess not dissimilar to some of the experiences in other municipalities. Knox, however, said that their rail crossing removal project was actually good and very positive in their community. Manningham were talking about they're doing flood mapping overlay and an attempt to implement that, and looking at a new customer call centre system that they have implemented. And generally Maroondah expressed their concern about the North East Link because they would actually be impacted by all options. So there's clearly some concerns around the region. And that concludes my reports as a delegate. I now call for a motion to accept the reports.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. Is there a seconder?
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. I'll put the motion to the vote to accept the reports. The motion is carried unanimously. We now move to item 10.2, which is the recommendations from Special Committee, Council meeting of the 11th of September 2017. Do I have a mover?
Happy to move, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. And a seconder?
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. Councillor Ellis, did you want to speak to it or treat it as procedural?
Nothing to add. It's fairly self-explanatory.
Yep. Okay, I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. I now move to item 10.3, record of assembly of councillors. Can I have a motion?
Happy to move.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. Is there a seconder for this motion?
Happy to second, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cutts. It is procedural. I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. We now move to item 11, reports on conferences or seminars attendance. I'll start on my right. Councillor Stennett.
Nothing to report.
Councillor Cutts.
Nothing to report.
Councillor Barker.
Nothing to report.
Councillor Liu.
Yes, I do have a few things to report, Madam Mayor. One was the Tradesmark event on the 5th of September at Box Hill Town Hall, which was organised by the Whitehorse Business Group. So this seminar looked at trademarks, and we had a presentation from Harvey Bolt from Bolt Commercial Lawyers, happens to also be a Whitehorse, a local business, and he just talked mainly about trademarks, and we had a pretty good attendance given the weather on the day, and he looked at the tips and traps around trademarks and for businesses also. The second event that I went to was the Parkland Community Forum, which was held on the same night actually, and so that brought together all the Parkland advisory committees and community groups together, and we also had a presentation from Dr. Tim Entwistle from the Royal Botanic Gardens Victoria, who gave a really fascinating talk on biodiversity and the changes to the Australian seasons, and he came up with a couple of interesting terms looking at Australia's changing seasons, sprinter and sprummer. So that was quite a fascinating and enlightening presentation. And lastly, I attended the Parenting Forum, which I spoke about earlier, and I also represented the Mayor at this event, and it looked at anxiety and stress in children and families as well. So we had presenters from the Anxiety Resource Centre of Victoria, and they went through the concept of mindfulness and steps to combat anxiety, stress and worries within children and parents as well, which I'm sure the attendees found insightful and helpful also. And that's all from my end. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. Councillor Munro.
No report.
Thank you. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, look, I have a couple of reports here. I'll try and get to them quickly. One that the Mayor will know about is was the Public Sector Network Smart City Series, Building the Cities of Tomorrow on the 9th of August at Collins Square that the Mayor and I attended. So there was a lot of information there, but the things that I picked out in particular was, as far as smart cities are concerned, we actually have to decide what a smart city actually means to us. It can mean many different things to different people. So if we're going to embrace the concept of a smart city, we need to know exactly what we're talking about. So I thought that was an interesting point to cover. Professor Mark Burry from Swinburne argued that we need to design in solutions for cities. Places like Barcelona have designed super blocks to have pedestrian precincts that separate the pedestrians and living spaces from cars. So I thought that was an interesting point that was made. He also made the point that design with the community, not for them, so that there needs to be community input in any design for spaces. He did mention that car parks are a waste of space. And he said that any car park business plan should include what to do with them when they're no longer needed in the future. So I think that's something to note as well. I also thought it was interesting, a presentation from, from one of the suppliers there, AnyHub, who supply street lighting poles or smart poles that can be used as nodes, if you like, to supply things like Wi-Fi, security cameras, data readers, EV charging, and many other things that the humble street pole can actually be used for in a city area. So the message was take control of your lighting assets, because they're important assets within a built area. The second seminar that I went to was an MAV1, Sustainable Communities, at the Anglis Centre on the 6th of September. So this was co-hosted by Transition Cities or Transition Towns. And their initiative is to reduce ecological footprint and promote social cohesion. They said design of streets is most important in a built environment. What they were saying, if you have an opportunity, convert streets to parks or pedestrian precincts in the city space context. There was a presentation by Rob Adams, Director, City Design, City of Melbourne, and he presented on cities of the future. And he talked about activating public spaces, and he made the admission that Docklands was a real disaster in that regard, that it wasn't an area where public spaces had been activated. So there's lessons that can be learned from there and things that can be done better in the future. Gil Burr, from Village Well, I don't know how to pronounce his surname, but he'll be involved in Whitehorse initiatives from time to time. But he presented on what he does present on, and that's placemaking and how that can be achieved through empowering local communities. So along the lines of the neighbourhood project that we've run successfully at Box Hill. There was also a good presentation from Sustainable Gardening Australia, and I've circulated that link about good practice in community gardens, especially with the Nunawading Hub in mind. There was also a presentation by the CEO of the Stephanie Alexander Kitchen Garden Foundation. So very interesting that their priority now is to address global childhood obesity by encouraging young children to get involved with growing, cooking and eating fresh produce, and to instill in children at a very early age a sensible diet. So I thought that was a great initiative that they're using as their strategy. The other one I went to just last week was held in the Waratah Room, the Eastern Climate Action Melbourne, that held a seminar last week. Speakers were from the CEO of the Climate Council, and also another speaker was the Head of Business Development, Moreland Energy Foundation Limited. So they reviewed the current status of our energy market. So it's just a maze. So in a word, I found it quite confusing. The Finkel review was referenced and how those recommendations can be put in place. What's the issue with a clean energy target? States such as Victoria are working towards their own renewable energy target because the Commonwealth hasn't got around to doing things in this space. How does an emissions intensity scheme work? Unfortunately, councillors, no answers were given about power blackouts this summer. These were questions that people were asking, or when we might see lower electricity prices. But I did note that there were some council officers in the audience, so they might be able to explain a bit more to councillors and the rest of us about potential power blackouts and when prices are going to be reduced for electricity. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, along with yourself, on Friday the 1st of September, I attended My Vote, My Voice at Parliament House. The event was run by the Australian Council of Women, and you, as you well know, were one of the guest speakers, and spoke very well, I might add. 6 schools, with approximately 3 speakers from each, spoke on local government issues and the impacts, future, past, not so much past, but future and present. I have to say they were all sensational. Students were provided feedback from yourself, Samantha Dunn, Barbara Abley, who is an ex-mayor of Geelong, on speaking skills and how to attract and maintain the attention of your audience. It was a very interesting event, and it was I was actually blown away by the drama, if you like, of these speakers. Some of them were quite dramatic. That was like they were on stage. Others read from their phones. Others read from little notes that they had in their hand, and as they read a note, they passed them by. Others read their speech completely. They were all very different, and surprisingly enough, they all spoke on different topics. They didn't repeat each other, and yet they had no idea of what each other was going to say. It was a very, very interesting event, and I thoroughly enjoyed making the effort to go because it was quite an early start for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Davenport.
I, with a number of councillors, attended the Eastern Metropolitan Partnership Annual Assembly on the 31st of August. Given that you're in attendance, Mayor, I'll defer all of the comments to yourself. I have nothing else to report.
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was planning to say nothing to report until you made the comment about the Eastern Metro, and I'm not going to comment still. I'm going to defer to you.
Oh, thank you. All right. Yes, the Eastern Partnerships Annual Assembly meeting, the mayors of the Eastern region were invited to meet with Minister Lily D'Ambrosio, and we attended a meeting in the city at her office. It was interesting. It seemed to be an opportunity for the government to say that although they did not have elected representatives on the particular groups, that I guess that opportunity was to engage with elected representatives that day. We had just half an hour with her, and that was a precursor to going to the actual Eastern Partnership Annual Assembly Forum, which many of you attended. The feedback that has been discussed following that forum, and I will just quote a variety of comments that have been made to me. Some people felt it was like a push polling. And these were not necessarily Whitehorse people, so I have to say this was across mixed groups at the tables. There were a range of statements that we were meant to identify the priority of, which they suggested had come from the representative committee that had been appointed. However, it was disappointing to know that the members of that committee had not seen the statements prior to that evening. And so, as a participant of that evening, I was very disappointed that really we had a range of statements that had not been discussed by the appointed committee, and then we were meant to prioritise very quickly. There were about three sort of opportunities where you got moved to do a table and had to do a different had a different challenge, I guess, with the mixed group of people at the table. And they certainly came from diverse areas across our eastern region, and some were local government representatives and some were just residents of different areas. I was a little challenged because when I did ask questions about the process, I did ask, I said, you're saying this has got up or this is the percentage, but I had noted many people were still looking and a little confused, and with the electronic push button vote recorder, that I know when I was in the middle of trying to ask something from one of the assistants at our table, that the votes were happening so fast that your vote missed. And I actually asked, well, can we get the raw data when you say it's been passed? How many people in the room have actually voted? And they couldn't tell you that. So I don't know how useful the percentages are, because certainly there were a number of people on a number of votes at the table I was sitting at who were still trying to work out, well, what does this mean? There was no clarification of the statements when people had to vote. People had questions about perhaps a deeper view of what they were meant to be voting on, and there was no opportunity to have that discussion. So I have to say that it was a little disappointing. Perhaps the most disappointing was the final table that I was sitting at, and it had people from CEO, local government CEO positions through to residents, etc. And we were meant to put together something that we felt was significant at the table and then put coloured dots on to see which was the most supported. And perhaps the most disappointing was two people from one municipality, doesn't matter which one, had put up two things and had some dots on it and decided, well, perhaps if they took the dots off one, withdrew one, this was after everyone had submitted them to the centre of the table, that then they could get theirs up. I will say it was the only table that put up something that was not actually endorsed really by the meeting. And the reason was because the two people came from the same municipality and put up a very parochial idea. And I think what is a real pity is that perhaps not everybody there realised that we're there looking at metropolitan partnerships, and we should be looking at the bigger issues that affect all the municipalities, and that seemed to be lost, certainly at that instance with a couple of participants. And so I do think that there was a lot more instruction perhaps needed. It was a fairly rushed evening, and my personal perspective was it was a long way from being as successful as it could have been. So that is my honest assessment, and I hope that the other councillors who were there support that report.
Madam Mayor, could I add that I was quite delighted that affordable housing issues came up voted number 2. That actually made it all worthwhile for me attending, quite frankly. I was very happy to see that. And it got a 78% support rate from the room. So I felt that was quite heartening.
That was actually very heartening, because I think that is an issue that is close to many of our hearts, and I did note that it was an issue that was put up from a table at which you were sitting at, Councillor Ellis, and but it is a very important issue for our communities, and I think that was good. But it was interesting when I was sitting at a table where suddenly a bit of shenanigans happened after everyone had put their things in, and it changed it. So,
And may I add that transport came up as number one issue, just slightly above it.
and that, of course, is very much a significant issue for us in Whitehorse, and, well, and many other municipalities, to be honest. So, yeah, so that was the annual assembly. I also attended the Smart City series, as Councillor Bennett stated, and I guess only one other comment that I was going to add to that was when they were talking about the, well, the wonderful design in Barcelona, then they were talking about if we wanted to create super blocks, that we should, that the principles around super blocks are that pedestrians will have priority and the speeds will be reduced to 10 to 20 kilometres per hour. And that's the vision for the future of how we make our cities safe and livable and for people to move around successfully. It will clearly probably discourage cars, and people will be more active. And that's the end of my report. Thank you. I now require a motion to receive the reports for conferences and seminars.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour?